Okay, I think we are going to get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ruth Zachrin, and I'm always very honored to say that I am the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. It's really nice to be with all of you this evening. I see some very familiar and very friendly faces. I see some new faces and new names. I just wanted to welcome you all into the space with us this evening. And it's really great to be with all of you. We have a pretty packed agenda. We have many different pieces of legislation, action items that we want to talk about. We are excited to be welcoming some speakers who will be joining us, which we'll talk about more in a moment. But a couple of housekeeping issues, as I mentioned before, it would be great if you can keep your speaker view on, or your view on speaker view. We are also recording the meeting, so we understand if folks want to stay off camera, but this meeting will be available to you afterwards. We'll be sending it out. And we also want to encourage folks to introduce themselves in the chat. So if you can take a moment and say your name, what organization you're from, if you're representing an organization, or where you're from, if you want to share that. And we've been talking a little bit already about, the big hearing that we had today, how much has already happened this week. November's felt really busy. So I thought it would be nice if everybody could also share just one thing in the midst of this hectic month that they are feeling grateful for. So your name, where you're from, a moment of gratitude, if you want to share that. And I'm now going to hand it over to our board president, Janet Goldenberg, to get us started with some announcements and lots of really cool information about what we've been up to.
Great, thank you, Ruth. And I'll say it gives me great pleasure to hear you introduce yourself as our inaugural executive director as well. So hi, everyone. It is so nice to see everyone tonight. I've been looking through the names and the faces, and it's nice to see some friendly faces. I'm really hoping that in the spring, we can figure out some way to do this hybrid or in person, depending on what the numbers are, because it would be so nice to be in the same space together. But I am thankful for Zoom for existing and letting us at least be together in this way. So I have the very happy job of doing some nice welcomes and a little bit of a few updates. So let me start first by welcoming all of you. And then I want to also extend a welcome to our new board members. Hopefully some of you have seen the emails that have gone out. We are just so honored to have some wonderful talent joining our board this year. I'll tell you just a little bit about them. Greg Gibson, who has joined our board this year, some of you might know, he has long been in the gun violence prevention movement. He's a survivor, having lost his son in 1992 at Bard's College. Greg, as I said, is well known, a passionate advocate for gun violence prevention. He's also the author of a book called Gone Boy, which some of you hopefully have seen. And we are just honored that he has brought his energy and his talent and his insights to the coalition board. So hopefully you'll have a chance to meet him and hear from him. So welcome, Greg. Second, I want to extend a very warm welcome to new board member, Nichelle Sadler. Nichelle is the senior director for one of our member organizations, UTEC Center for Excellence. That helps support all of the Department of Health funded GVP organizations throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Nichelle is a longtime Boston resident and community activist, and the board is already benefiting from her enormous strategic thinking and insight and energy. So please, when you see her, give a warm welcome to Nichelle. And last, but absolutely certainly not least, Rob Stegman. Some of you might remember Rob from the very beginning because he was involved in helping to advise a member organization, Moms Demand Action of Massachusetts in the early days. And we are delighted that he has brought his talents to the Mass Coalition. Rob is the president of Blue Star Media, and so he brings significant media and communications expertise. We are really just really honored and privileged to have such wonderful talent join our board. So welcome to all three of you. I also want to extend a very warm welcome to some new member organizations that have joined the coalition. They include Temple Reim in Newton, the Arredondo Family Foundation, the Galen Gibson Fund, the Newton Gun Violence Prevention Collaborative, and drumroll please, our first ever corporate member, Amalgamated Bank. And Amalgamated has already been involved in a key way, as you're going to hear about in just a moment, in helping to support gun violence prevention work. So hats off to them and welcome. I also want to put out there that we're very soon going to be welcoming a new website. You've seen our new logo, and Ruth and Emily and Angelica have been very hard at work developing a new website, which will hopefully be more user-friendly, have even better information, and be a great resource for everyone. So I hope when that rolls out, you'll take a chance to look through it. I think it's going to be rolled out in connection with our annual appeal. I don't know, I'm sure Ruth will tell us. But please keep a lookout for that. We're all very excited, and enormous thanks to Ruth and Emily and Angelica for all the work that went into it, and to Rob Stegman, who I know has been a tremendous part of getting it ready for the world, and so many other board members as well. Finally, a couple of other substantive updates. Speaking of websites, we rolled out our ERPO website a few months ago. Really simple URL, maerpo.org. maerpo.org. ERPO can save lives, but only if people know about it. So those of you who are in member organizations, think about printing something out and posting it on a wall. Think about including something in a newsletter. The more we get the word out that there is a way to temporarily remove guns from people in distress, the more lives we can save. And this website can be a resource. If people know there's a way to do this, and there's a place I can go to get good information, to walk me through this, to answer my questions, to connect me to what I need. So please help us spread the word about the ERPO website. Finally, two hopefully quick, I'll try to keep them quick, substantive updates about some gun violence prevention work that we've been engaged in. Hopefully some of you joined us when we co-hosted a seminar with our partner Giffords about ghost guns. And without going into a lot of detail, ghost guns are guns that, because of the way they are assembled or printed off a printer, bypass the traditional means for background checks and the different checks and balances we've been able to put in place. They are extremely dangerous. Some of you might have seen the New York Times article that came out over the weekend about them. I kind of looked at it and said, oh, look, they've discovered it's a problem. We knew it was a problem. We got to do something about it. We've been waiting for a federal rule. The comment period closed in August. We're hoping January, February, the federal rule will take effect. Once it does, we'll be able to take a look at the specific terms, figure out what we might need to do to Massachusetts's law to make sure that we have extended the protections as far as we can, and also to make sure the provisions get implemented to the extent there is stuff that needs to be done. As you all know, passing a law is one thing, having it actually take effect, holding people accountable is a whole different thing. So we want to make sure that we can get as broad protection as we possibly can. And finally, I want to just touch for a moment on a case, a Supreme Court case that some of you might have been following out of the Second Circuit. It's known as New York Rifle and Pistol versus Bruin. And that case is before the Supreme Court. It's been argued. It challenges a New York law that requires a showing of good cause to get a concealed carry permit to carry a firearm outside the home. And the reason everyone's watching it across the country, and it has implications for the whole country, is because it has the potential for the first time for the Supreme Court to extend the protections of the Second Amendment to carrying a gun outside the home rather than just in the home. And even though Massachusetts doesn't have the same special cause requirement that New York does, we are what's known as a may issue state. Without getting into too much details, what that means is, depending on the scope of the Supreme Court decision, it could impact our laws as well. So we're keeping a close eye on that. We want to make sure once we see that decision, if changes need to be made, if they can be made to keep us protected, we want to do that. And I want to give a shout out to Amalgamated Bank, because one of the things that is really important with these cases is for different amicus briefs to be submitted so the court gets the perspective of a lot of different constituencies. And we know this court in particular is going to be interested in the perspective of the business community. And there was not going to be a business brief until Amalgamated Bank stepped up and agreed to be the first signer of an amicus brief from the business community, urging the court not to invalidate this rule. So kudos to Amalgamated Bank for stepping up. It could have national implications, and we will keep an eye on it and keep you posted. I think that was everything I was supposed to cover.
Thank
Is
you,
that right?
Janet. Amazing. Yep, that was awesome. Thank you for
Right.
giving all those updates, and just as always, appreciate all of the leadership that you have brought to the coalition over many years of your involvement with us and everything that you bring to us as board president. Before we move on to our next piece, I just want to acknowledge we're being joined by Representative Lindsay Sabadosa. Welcome. We're so excited to hear from you in just a few moments, and we're glad you could join us. Before we get to that part of talking about the bill that we are going to be unpacking and dissecting a little bit today, I wanted to also introduce our Legislative Action Chair, Madeline Rinaldi, who's going to speak to us for just a few moments, and is also coming off of testifying on behalf of the coalition at today's hearing, which was really pretty amazing. And I was glad to be able to hear your powerful testimony, Maddie. So please, if I could turn it over to you for a few moments.
Awesome. Thank you, Ruth. Hello, everybody. My name is Madeline Rinaldi, but you can call me Maddie. I am from Newton, Massachusetts, and I have been a board member with the coalition for a while now, and I'm really, really excited to be the new chair of our Legislative Action Committee, which is super duper exciting. And I am just so thrilled to be here with all of you. I see a lot of familiar faces from the hearing earlier today. So nice to see you all again. I'm just going to briefly set the stage a little bit for the work that our committee, the Legislative Action Committee, is really going to be looking to do in the coming months and years, and sort of what our focus is before we dive into the specific bill that we're going to be talking about tonight. And so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the work that we're going to take on. So in our legislative activity, the coalition is really focused on taking a holistic approach to gun violence prevention in our advocacy strategies, in the policies that we choose to promote, and the way that we conduct outreach to accomplish those goals, which means that we really advance and we advocate for bills that work to end gun violence in all of its forms. And we advocate for bills that don't just address the guns themselves, that focus on restrictions around certain types of firearms or the way in which someone can acquire a firearm, but also expanding that scope to think about the root causes of gun violence that really put individuals and communities in those dangerous situations in the first place and create cycles of violence that we really want to break. And only by doing all of those things at the same time can we really achieve meaningful gun violence prevention here in Massachusetts. So in particular, the coalition has really taken on bills focused on criminal justice reform and sort of expanded our reach that way. So we've advocated for things like juvenile justice and the ACEs bill, which Rep. Sabadosa is going to talk more about in a little bit, to ensure that, we not just keep firearms out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them, but that's not enough. We need to go further and make sure that, the cycle that, brought that gun into that person's hand is disrupted entirely. And expanding our view to other, intersectional issues that we know relate to gun violence, whether that's housing insecurity or education, and thinking about how we as a gun violence prevention organization can do a really good job at addressing the issue in all of its different faces. And so I hope that tonight and throughout the rest of this legislative session and beyond, that you'll lend a hand to the advocacy efforts that we promote and the way that we choose to advance this important legislation, and that you're also like an active voice in helping us decide what those priorities are, and letting us help you in your pursuits and your advocacy. And so I'll leave my information in the chat if anybody wants to get in touch with me to talk about our priorities, or to ask questions, or to offer your thoughts, because I would love to hear from you. And I really look forward to our partnership and working together on this committee and beyond. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass it back to Ruth, and we're going to get into the weeds on the bill that we're here to talk about.
Thank you so much, Maddie. It's such a pleasure to be able to work with you and have you in this role and have you be a part of the coalition's broader work, including our legislative advocacy work. So now we're going to get into some more action, some education about some of the legislation we're supporting, as well as opportunities to get involved in helping to move these bills forward. Tonight, we're going to start with focusing on the ACEs bill. And just to give a little bit of context setting before I introduce our speakers who are going to tell us more about this work, the ACEs bill provides an alternative outside of law enforcement response for folks experiencing a mental health crisis. And this bill has been particularly meaningful to me as a former trauma response clinician. I've been involved in many situations where someone has been in active crisis, and it can be very hard and further and upsetting and traumatic to have a uniformed or armed police officer be the one to respond to their emotional distress. So there are a lot of reasons why this bill really resonates with me. And to set the stage for the coalition's involvement with this bill, the reason why we are entering this conversation and we're really committed to this work is because this is also about addressing the issue of police shootings. To share a bit of information with you that was also found in our testimony that we submitted when this bill had a hearing over the summer. This just sets the stage for why this particular policy is so important. It is estimated that 1 in 10 police calls in the United States is related to a person with an untreated mental health issue. And it is also estimated that between 1/4 and 1/2 of all victims of police shootings are dealing with an untreated mental health issue. And this is also a racial justice issue. Communities of color are significantly over-policed compared to majority white communities, and people of color are disproportionately impacted by police violence. Police are twice as likely to use violence against a person of color than a white person, and a Black person is 2.8 times as likely to be fatally shot by a law enforcement officer than a white person. So we are entering this conversation around really reducing police shootings, recognizing that so many police shootings do happen in the context of a mental health crisis call. We have been excited to be working with a robust coalition of organizations who are all working in unison to get this bill passed and really get into the weeds of the content and figuring out how to move this forward. And it is my pleasure this evening that we are being joined by two people who are very in the thick of this work, who will share with us some of their wisdom and experiences to help us understand this bill. And then we'll talk about how we move it forward. So to introduce our speakers, and then I'm going to ask each of them to talk for a few moments about the bill, and then we're going to get into a facilitated Q&A. And if you have any questions for the speakers, please feel free to use the chat to submit those questions, and we will try to get to all of them later on. But first, I want to introduce Representative Lindsay Sabadosa. Representative Sabadosa is the first woman to ever hold the 1st Hampshire district seat. Rep. Sabadosa describes herself as a community organizer at heart, which touches my heart as well. From her State House bio, I learned that she organized her first protest march at the age of 9 to protest the closing of her hometown library due to budget cuts. That is pretty cool. She quickly became involved in political campaigns starting in high school, and then she began to focus her electoral work on women candidates, working for both local and statewide candidates, and ultimately joining the board of directors of Emerge Massachusetts in order to deepen and expand her interest in building benches. She is also the lead sponsor for the ASIC Pact, and I welcome you. And I just want to introduce our next speaker, and I'm going to give you both a chance to talk a bit more about your work on this bill or on this model. Our additional speaker is Barbara Okeny. Barbara Atim Okeny identifies as South Sudanese and is a first-generation immigrant. She is a licensed mental health counselor and board-certified art therapist, which I also think is pretty cool. She has experience with outpatient and outreach mental health work, providing accessible mental health services for youth and families impacted by trauma. She currently works for a group practice, providing individual therapy and consulting with a focus on decolonizing mental health care, cultivating community, and providing culturally informed and evidence-based treatment for folks from marginalized communities. As Diverse Peoples United Outreach and Education Director, she helps with mental health and education-focused initiatives, including public speaking, anti-racist curriculum development, and advocacy for legislative change. And first, I want to thank you both for joining us this evening. Really excited to have this conversation. And now I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to turn it over first to Rep. Sabadosa to talk a little bit about the bill, and then Barbara after that.
Thank you so very much, Ruth. I'm so grateful to be here this evening, and I'm also very grateful to share space with Barbara because her resume is just astounding, and it's always wonderful to be in a space with people who really understand this work. I feel like as a legislator, you're sort of this outsider that tries to make positive impact, but you're not the person who's doing the work day to day. So to be in a space where I get to share that with someone who is just in the thick of it, I'm so grateful and just very honored. So I'll talk very briefly about the legislation, and we'll look forward to any questions and comments that arise. So the bill, just to start, is an act to create alternative for community emergency services, or the ACES bill. It's H 2519 S 1552, and I've filed this with Senator Sonia Chang Diaz on the Senate side. We do refer to the bill as the ACES bill, and it is extraordinarily difficult, as I'm sure many of you know, to find a bill that comes up with a good acronym, but I think we did it with this bill. I will share with you that the reason my interest in this bill did not come from anything related to gun violence, although I am really we spent a lot of time crafting the bill talking about how we use a vehicle like this to address questions around police shootings and around improving actual access to mental health care in the communities. But my initial interest was years before I was elected to office, where I was taking my daughter to the YMCA, and there was a child in the parking lot that had some sort of meltdown. I have no knowledge of who the child was or what the child's health history was, but I know that that child had a crisis situation, to the point where it was decided that the police were going to come and the police were going to be the response to that. And this child was very little, and it felt to me that there has to be something better that we offer our kids than the police showing up when they have a behavioral health incident or a mental health incident or whatever it was that sparked someone's need to call the police that day. I know as a child I was taught you call the police when something bad happens, and what happened that day was not bad. And so it started this interest in, well, what does crisis response look like? How do we do better? And so in through many conversations, we sort of ended up with this piece of legislation. We had started talking about it during the police reform debate last summer, and I really felt like that was the moment that we put crisis response into that bill, because if we're talking about police reform, how do you not talk about an alternative? But unfortunately, that bill wasn't the vehicle. And even though we filed an amendment and tried to direct the conversation that way, the bill really it took a different form and moved in another direction. And so we regrouped after that debate and said, all right, so what do we file? And at the time, there was a lot of work that was also happening on the federal level, because, of course, this conversation about police reform and what does emergency response look like has been a national debate. And so what we came up with in this bill is really a grant program. It's kind of a very simple bill at heart, because it doesn't really spell out what the response should be. It really gives it to the communities to say, how do you determine for yourselves what kind of program will work for you? This really just sets up a competitive grant program to develop local systems for non-emergency and emergency situations involving mental health and substance abuse. And the legislation goes through and it talks about these community-based options that could help support mental, physical well-being of residents, prevent violence, de-escalate volatile situations, and ensure access to human services and a reduced use of force. It puts together a panel made up of I think real community-based experts to sort of decide how this money would be parceled out to different community groups. And we spent a lot of time trying to make sure that we were including all of those people who have actual knowledge of what their community looks like and what and have direct experience working in the field, rather than sort of your traditional legislative commission that has appointees from the governor and the legislature, but doesn't necessarily have the people who are at the core of the work. And so the bill, I think, in a way is very simple. It will take those federal dollars and will move them out into the state. And you know, we are currently at a moment where communities, I think Barbara will address this better than I ever could, are looking to figure out how to do this right now. The bill simply makes sure that they can pay to do it.
Thank you so much, Rep. Sabadosa. It was really helpful to get that background in the bill, and it feels like a great segue to call on Barbara to share with us some of the work that's happening in Lynn to actually take this policy and bring it to life into actual practice. So Barbara, I would love to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Rep. Sabadosa. I appreciate being able to share this space with you as well. Okay, so I just have a presentation to go along with what I'm talking about. Just pull that up. Okay, can everyone see that okay? Okay. So I'd like to begin just by saying that this is going to include some stories and lived experiences of folks who have had harmful interactions with the Lynn police. So if you can, feel free to take space if you need to, or do what you need to take care of yourself during this, this presentation. So for reimagining public safety, as part of the Lynn Racial Justice Coalition, or the LRJC, we've committed to reimagining what public safety looks like without police intervention for mental health crises, substance use issues, or homelessness. Okay, so I'd just like to orient us with a quote. The video of a white cop's knee on the neck of Mr. Floyd as he pleaded, "I can't breathe," has become a modern day version of Emmett Till's open casket, which awakened and galvanized a generation of people around racial violence and oppression. As so many new white allies are now joining the long-fought movement for racial equity and justice. In every generation, every city, there's an Emmett Till, a George Floyd, Tanisha Anderson, Charlena Lyles. Lynn has Dennis Reynosa. Within Lynn's recent history, there's Victor White. Victor White lives in Lynn, Massachusetts. He was unlawfully arrested on his own property and brutalized while in police custody. I'll provide a little bit more information about his case and how it applies to the work of the LIC later on. Within Lynn's history, there's also Dennis Reynosa. Dennis was a 29-year-old military veteran who was experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder following his return from service. On September 5th, 2013, he's experiencing a mental health episode when a woman in his neighborhood called 911, reporting that he was screaming and walking around without a shirt on. Before the officers entered the home, they were told by a postal worker that he had been in the military and had suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. The responding police officers entered the home. Due to their militarized presence, triggered him. He grabbed their gun and they shot him repeatedly. This happened within minutes of responding to the 911 call in the same room as his 5-year-old son. He passed away later that day due to his injuries. There was an investigation from the district attorney who found that the actions were justified from the officers as an act of self-defense. They also received an award from the governor at the time, Deval Patrick, for their actions, and the family still has not received justice. What we can all unite around is the imperative to reimagine public safety and what will lead to safer communities for all Americans. In the summer of 2020, local North Shore-based organizations got together to envision community safety within the city of Lynn. These organizations, Lynn United for Change, North Shore Juneteenth Association, Essex County Community Organization, New Lynn Coalition, Prevent the Cycle, IUE CWA Local 201, and Diverse People United, came together to demand a 10% decrease in the police budget within the city of Lynn, which is a $2 million decrease for the fiscal year of 2021. This was at a time when the city was increasing the police budget by $2 million. From there, the LRJC was formed. The LRJC is a coalition committed to racial equity and community safety. The collective of organizations' advocacy efforts include workers' rights, immigrant rights, rights to fair housing and combating the gentrification efforts in the city of Lynn, racial justice and equity. The intent of the coalition was always preventative, trying to prevent another unnecessary, unjust killing at the hands of the police. Over the course of several months, the coalition drafted a set of demands: mandatory body cameras for all Lynn police officers, an independent investigation into current allegations of police brutality, which concerns Victor White. In the summer of 2020, Victor was on his own property in Lynn, following a get-together when the police showed up. There was a row of several police cars responding to a neighbor's noise complaint, despite the fact that there was no noise. He was unlawfully detained, arrested for a crime he did not commit, and beaten while in their custody. Another demand is the establishment of civilian oversight board, being able to actualize accountability for police brutality, and the creation of an unarmed crisis response team independent of the police. These demands led to a community hearing, creating space for folks within the community to voice supports for the demands. Each organization helped with canvassing and providing social media posts to notify the community. There were months of tense meetings with the mayor and other elected officials, and the demands were granted one by one. As of April 2021, body cameras are now mandated for Lynn police officers. Video footage of Victor's interaction with the police was released, and the mayor allocated $500,000 for an unarmed crisis response team in Lynn. So the unarmed crisis response team in Lynn is called ALERT, and it stands for the All Lynn Emergency Response Team. So the intent with this team is to provide a safe alternative for folks of color to police response for mental health crises, to reduce the criminalization of mental health, substance use, and homelessness, to prevent the cycle of incarceration for folks who need mental health services in connection to community supports, to increase access to mental health services for folks of color, addressing systemic barriers and racism. So the LRJC's vision and conceptualization for the ALERT team is for it to be entirely independent of the police. So that would include a separate phone line and number, so not calling 911. And this is due to recognizing the harm that takes place within police interactions with folks of color. When folks call this number, the outreach clinicians will be diverse. So that diversity can be within their race, ethnicity, their linguistic background, to better reach and serve the diverse community of Lynn, where there are large Haitian, Cambodian, and Latinx, as well as immigrant communities. They'll encompass trainings and qualities, which include safe de-escalation practices, anti-bias, anti-racist approaches, cultural sensitivity and humility, as well as commitment to community building and community healing from racial and systemic trauma. So at this point in our process in developing the ALERT team, we are imagining public safety with the diverse community of Lynn. So we are in negotiations with the mayor and preparing to work with the new administration due to the outcome of our recent election. We're currently in the process of developing the team with the inclusion of community members' input. So this includes working with a consulting firm to conduct research to inform the development of the team. So this will include canvassing, community outreach to be able to inform Lynn residents and Lynn community, and to be able to elicit community response to make sure it's really community driven and informed by members of the community. Yep, so that would be our focus for now, trying to reimagine public safety with the diverse community of Lynn.
Thank you so much for that, Barbara. It really shows the power of community advocacy and bringing folks together in common voice to demand for change. And it's really so excited to see how this plays out for you and for the community of Lynn. And I think it's really great to have both a piece around the ACEs bill itself, as well as understanding the work that you're doing on the ground in Lynn. Because while individual communities might make this commitment to adopting this kind of policy and this kind of model, the importance of the ACEs bill is to make sure that this becomes a part of the law of the land in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that we codify that this is a model that we are adopting, that we're going to figure out how to fund in the state, and to make sure that more communities across the Commonwealth are able to develop these models in accordance to what community members want to see happen in their own communities. And this actually leads me to my first question for both of you, which is, how do you envision the role of community members, particularly those who've been most impacted by over-policing? How do you envision them being involved in giving input, implementing the model, and then as oversight as well? And Rep. Sabadosa, if you could start with your answer, that would be great.
Well, I think that it really does need to be left up to all the different communities as exactly how they're going to organize this. I will say that in my hometown of Northampton, we are working on and implementing a model that is really interesting to hear exactly what Lynn is doing, because I think we could take some pointers from them. But the plan for us, at least, is to have an advisory board as well as a peer response piece to that, so that you are having directly impacted communities involved in both aspects, both in providing the service through peer response model, as well as having a sort of supervisory advisory capacity. But I wouldn't necessarily want to force Northampton's idea of what our system should look like on any other community, which is why I tend to be a little careful in that. We've spent a lot of time with the bill, talking about what works in very, very rural communities is not going to work in more urban communities versus suburban communities. So it really does behoove each town and city to come up with something that will work for their own folks.
Thank you. Barbara, does anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that it would be important to have the community be part of, like, for example, with Lynn, the Civilian Oversight Board, to be able to have a voice and a say as to kind of what accountability looks like when officers are conducting themselves in a way that's harmful, for folks of color. So be able to have a voice and a say kind of in that piece when it comes to addressing incidents of police brutality, as well as ensuring that the alert team is held accountable too, that we're actually delivering the services in a way that isn't continuing to further perpetuate harm. So I think having them involved in both components would be important.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask a few more questions of the two of you, but I also wanted to invite everyone who's in the Zoom with us to submit any questions you may have in the chat, and we will certainly try to get to them. But I would also love it if you could reflect on why you feel this model is so critical at this moment in time. I invite either of you who would like to go first to go ahead.
Barbara, would you like to go first this time?
Sure, I can go first. Yeah, so I think of in understanding why this is so critical at this time, just having a working understanding of the impact of racial trauma and how that can impact folks when it comes to their mental health, where you can experience sort of like PTSD-like symptoms. There's the the dissociation, the hypervigilance. You can experience isolation or kind of feeling ostracized and alienated. That can have a really significant impact on folks that are already experiencing other kinds of systemic issues and barriers and concerns. So kind of understanding that this is very cumulative and important to be able to address, to provide alternatives, to be able to stop this continuance of harm towards folks of color and people experiencing mental health issues.
And I guess I would add to that, in addition to sort of the the point where we are with the actual knowledge and information, we are at a moment where there is money coming into the state. The federal government has included sort of this funding for states over 3 years to really implement these models, and then to get a reimbursement through the Medicaid waiver for this. And so that really is game changing when it's not just coming out of state dollars. We have federal support for that. There is a national dialogue. I mean, I think if you talk to people in just about any state at this point, I was having a conversation the other day with someone from the panhandle of Texas, and one of the things they're talking about is alternative emergency response. So this is not a red and blue issue. This is really something that the whole country is looking at, and then the federal government is stepping up. So that really just behooves us as a state to push this forward and to take advantage of that. And I think even the governor's office, they're working on this behavioral health roadmap right now. This is the time for us to say, great, it's wonderful you're moving in that direction. We have some suggestions. And that's where I really view the ACEs bill as coming in to say, and there's a way we can make sure that the community is involved, that this is not just a very bureaucratic decision-making process. So there are a lot of moving pieces in this that really make this the right time.
Thank you for that. And I think it's a great segue from my next question, because the coalition has been involved in preliminary meetings about this, and then more earnestly advocating for this for probably close to a year now. And I do want to just for a moment really appreciate Rep. Sabadosa, who spent some time meeting with folks from our community council in particular, who had some feedback, some concerns, really wanted to parse through some of the language in the bill and really understand not just the policy, but the potential impact. And I know that you really heard and took seriously that feedback and integrated, which is amazing. And we appreciate being able to have that level of conversation and partnership with you. So thank you for that. And as we're hearing these conversations happening throughout the country, I would love it if both of you could reflect for a moment about your hopes and dreams for this model, whether it's for the Lynn community, whether it's for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. What are you hoping this is going to bring to communities in the Commonwealth if we are able to move this program forward and get the ACEs bill passed? Barbara, would you like to start?
Sure. Yeah, my hope is that it'll be able to provide access to mental health services for folks from marginalized communities, particularly for folks who may not feel as comfortable maybe reaching out to the police department, even if there's like a mental health worker that's working within there, just knowing that the police are going to also be accompanying them on that call. You'll be able to really reduce the stigma and some of the barriers that come into play for folks to be able to access mental health services, and to ensure more of a sense of safety when it comes to receiving help or asking for help.
Thank you, Rep. Sabadosa.
Learn to say everything that Barbara said. And I guess for me, just thinking about it in terms of policy and sort of moving forward. What I'm hoping is that we'll see the implementation of these services, and that's like bite one of the apple, but the apple is large and there's a lot of things that we need to do. So not only do we need to create these alternatives, but then we need to work on developing better services once we have the right response. So one of the things that we hear, and we even hear this from the police right now, they will bring people to the hospital when there's a mental health emergency. Well, the hospital doesn't really do anything. They watch the people for a little while, and they're like, okay, now it's time for you to go back out onto the street. And then often you have the same cycle day after day after day. And that's, I think, if the person is lucky, because it could actually go much worse than that. So that's another piece that we're then going to have to work on. We have the right responder. How do we then make sure that the services are expanded? How do we find places for people to really get the care that meets them on the level that they need to be met at? And so I view this as like step one of a very long journey in actually responding to mental health, behavioral health, and substance abuse in the state.
Thank you. And just a quick thing that I want to share, it's something that came up in our conversations at the community council about this bill. Suggestion was made that we should really be thinking about, as this model emerges, how do we also utilize it as a pathway to employment for folks from the communities being served by this model. And that felt like a really amazing and important thing for us to consider. Yes, it's about providing services to the individuals in crisis and their family members, because their family members are very affected by what's happening, but it's also a way to create opportunity in the communities that will be served by this model as well, which I thought was a really cool way of thinking about it. And Rep. Sabadosa, I know that you have to jump off. I don't know if you have a second just to talk about action steps. We will be, just so folks know, sending out information after this meeting with some concrete ideas and steps that people can take to support all of the things that we're talking about this evening. But if you want to just jump in with some thoughts about action steps that would be helpful for this bill before you have to jump off, that would be great.
Absolutely. So the bill is currently before the Joint Committee on Public Safety. And so I think the best action step for people is to reach out to the chairs. We have Chair Timilty and Chair Gonzalez. And if you happen to be represented by anybody who is on the committee or either of those chairs, those are going to be the key people in moving this bill forward. You know, they've really been very lovely. They've expressed interest in the bill. We've had a lot of conversations about it, but they do need to hear that there is sort of a groundswell of support for this. They know that the state is moving in this direction and that that a lot of communities are moving in this direction, rather. I don't know that we should say the whole state, but there's a lot of conversation about, I think what Barbara said, you know, do we move towards models where we have co-response? So a social worker and police officers, do we do this embedded model, or do we move to something completely separate? I think the chairs are grappling with that. And so to really hear from people to explain why embedding is not the solution. I mean, I have to say, after just the first meeting about this bill months and months ago, I was like, oh no, of course that's not the right solution, because you hear the stories of the people with real experience and it becomes very, very clear. So I would be grateful to any of you if you were willing to take that action step and have the conversation, send the email, make the phone call, whatever feels right for you.
Thank you, Rep. Sabadosa. We will be sending out the list of who's on that committee as well with the action steps that are disseminated after this meeting. So folks will have that information. And if you need to jump off, Rep. Sabadosa, we totally understand. I do want to say thank you before you do. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I really, really appreciate being here and in this space with all of you. And if anyone has questions, and I am sorry I have to jump, but I have another meeting. If anyone has questions or wants to follow up, please feel free to reach out. I will pop my my email address in the chat.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Rep. Sabadosa. Barbara as well, just so much gratitude to you for being with us this evening and sharing this information. I saw that we did have a question around buy-in from the law enforcement themselves. And I'm wondering if before we end, if you might share a little bit about what that's been for you and Lynn.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, when it comes to the buy-in piece, the consultants that we're actively working with, when they first started, they had done some outreach, like when it came to different stakeholders. That included the Lynn Police Department, along with like other emergency responders, like firefighters. So there is a lot of opposition to the, like, specifically being independent of the police, like definitely being more of a proponent of like the co-response model and kind of further expanding that, as opposed to kind of creating a separate team, as well as, you know, concerns around like the 911 piece, like having it like a separate number, and kind of having concerns that if it was a separate number, like they would still be called anyways to respond to the crisis. So they kind of feeling like they should still be there. So I think the consultants have been doing a really good job of helping to facilitate those conversations, be able to kind of have people speak their like their experiences and kind of help in understanding kind of where everybody's coming from different viewpoints. But there is definitely like those differences when it comes to kind of all the people involved.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And again, thank you for being with us this evening. We truly appreciate it. I look forward to working with you more as this progresses.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Ruth.
So we are now going to move to the next part of our program. It was great to learn more about the ACEs bill. We also have some other bills that we have been working on, and we'd love to share some information with you. We're actually going to be able to take some action too before this evening is over, so don't go anywhere because there's exciting stuff to come. but I would love it if Sana Fadl, who is the Deputy Director of Citizens for Juvenile Justice and a member of our Community Council, could join us for a moment to talk about some of the bills that we are working on in partnership with CFJJ.
Thank you, Ruth, and Barbara, and Rep. Sabadosa, and Representative Scott. Thank you so much. Ruth, you should have given me a little bit more leeway before following them, and that's a great presentation. And like, come back to earth where we talk about like other bills. It was really great to hear what was happening in Lynn and at the State House. So thank you both for that work. So just wanted to share, I know the coalition has several priorities that are currently pending in legislation. I'm going to talk about 3 that are under the criminal justice reform, the juvenile justice reform section of the coalition's priorities. So the first, and I'm going to look at them from like the chronologically about, you know, the life cycle of a young person through our legal system. So in the very beginning, when the first bill that we are partnering on is around expanding diversion for young people. Diversion, the term diversion can mean many things. A lot of people think about it like diversion from being in jail or incarcerated or other things. Like our diversion bill is diverting young people from even having a court case in the first place. So it's as early as prevention of entering the legal system as you can. Massachusetts has a recent law which allows judges to divert young people into community-based settings or some other responses that is not prosecution and legal system involvement. Finding an alternative that can work better for kids. That law put a lot of stringent limitations on judges on what they can and what they can or cannot divert. And many of those are the legislature looked at the adult criminal code and said, okay, let's apply that to the juvenile code. So because the criminal legal system and the juvenile system aren't really like identical, they're actually separate on purpose. There's a lot of like sort of discord, if that's the right word, about how it's being applied, where young people have opportunities of things that are like low-level offenses, but because of how an adult would be prosecuted, those young people don't have the access to this diversion. So we have legislation that Fluker Oakley and Senator Cream filed that would expand that the types of offenses that young people can be diverted for. So it's one of those. That's one bill, and that bill is currently pending with the Judiciary Committee. The second is the second cycle is that young people are involved in the legal system. But imagine you're a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old. For any of you who have teenagers in your life, developmentally, they're not very different. How their behavior is not very different. Their social circumstances are not very different, but in the eye of the law, because an 18-year-old is legally an adult, the law treats them extremely different. So what we know is a young person, if a 17-year-old and 18-year-old were involved in the same exact behavior, and both of them got involved in the legal system, the 17-year-old has greater opportunities for diversion, which we just talked about. Their records are confidential. They will not show up in a quarry. There is an entire statewide network, not statewide, it's in multiple counties, to prevent young people from actually being detained pre-trial because of the harms of incarceration of young people. So even DYS, the agency that is in charge of locking up, is working on finding ways to not incarcerate young people. We have racial disparities in our legal systems, adult and juvenile. Some young people have some of the highest racial disparities, but the 17-year-old will be a system that is required by federal and state law to address those racial disparities. So over the past decade and a half, actually those disparities are still there, but it's been shrinking, as opposed to the adult system where there is nothing to say like you need to do this. You need to address this disparities. The 17-year-old gets incarcerated in DYS. The focus is really on how to get a young person to mature into adulthood without, like, it's less focused on punishment, more focused on development. And finally, the 17-year-old comes out of DYS or comes out of whatever the case. Their record is still a juvenile record. That's not going to come on a rope. And that's a really big piece about like, you know, sort of the confidentiality of the juvenile system. The 18-year-old, on the other hand, much more likely to have an open case. They may get dismissed, but even if their case is dismissed, their case is in the quarry. If they get incarcerated, the adult system is pretty toxic in terms of how it treats all people who are incarcerated, but young people specifically tend to be either targets, or because of their worry and sort of this fight and flight, they tend to get more in trouble in prison and jail, which means they're less likely to benefit from programming, which happens to be voluntary and you earn rather than part of the function. And then you come out, you have a quarry, you have a record. So you have like an 18-year-old, I've talked to like 18-year-olds, like, well, I have a felony conviction, and you can already see like just having that adult record puts a damper on their hopes. So we have a bill filed by Senator Corey, but now Senator Crichton from Lynn has taken it on as a priority. And also by Representative O'Day from Worcester, that says, all of our other systems that work with young people don't look at 18-year-olds as an adult. They are still part of their child and adolescent units. We should raise the age to which a young person is prosecuting an adult from 18 to age 21. That's when you can get a gun. That's when you can be a police officer. That's when you can pot, alcohol, gambling, all of those. Like we want to delay that, and that's where we want to have the same risk of adult system involvement. We want to raise it to that. So that's the second bill. And then third bill is around records. And then one of the things we want to do is juvenile records are much more confidential than adult records. One of the things we have in the law is allows for expungement of records for cases where a young person had a case prior to age 21 and nothing after age 21. But there's a lot of limitations on that. One of the things we want to do is we wanted to remove some of those limitations because the idea is if we've grown up from being a young person and now much older, what is the utility of a criminal record about predicting your future risk if it's been something that's pretty old, irrelevant? It's sort of like young people have moved on and grown up, but their records are still following them. So we want to expand that expungement. So that bill is also in the Judiciary Committee. All three of them are in the Judiciary Committee. So this is just a quick overview of our fun bills. And I just wanted to talk about sort of things you can do right now. And honestly, what I tell you right now is relevant for any bill that you all are active on. The legislature is about to go into recess, like a holiday recess, starting tomorrow. There's going to be some hearings still. So expungement, for example, hasn't had a hearing. We're expected to have a hearing before the new year. But most of the bills have had a hearing. So now the committee is negotiating. All of the substantive committees are negotiating because they have a deadline of February 2nd for all of those bills to be reported out. Whether it's going to be reported out favorably, as in like, yes, it's out of committee, we're going to take it to the next step, or we'll say we ought not to pass, which means we actually put a F on it and we don't like it, which is the worst thing that can happen to a bill. Or the third option, which is the the outcome that a lot of bills get, is sent to study, which technically is not a study. It just gets put in a shelf until next session, which means the bill doesn't really move until January 2023, if it gets filed again, because a study means it's just not going to move forward in the process. So. One of the things we're looking at right now is, as we're looking at the February 2nd deadline, we're asking a lot of our constituents and our supporters to take action on all these bills. One is, if a bill has not been reported out of committee, legislators can still co-sponsor. In previous years, that deadline passed like within the first week of filing. This is a really great opportunity, and a lot of legislators are waiting on sponsoring when they had to. In the past, they only had 2 weeks to do it, because they want to have conversations with their constituents and advocates and other people. Like, talk to me. I'm not going to rush on a bill based on what I read about it. Tell me about it. So they want to hear from constituents, what are these bills and why should I co-sponsor? Co-sponsoring is one of the easiest asks, because if you convince them, it just means, yes, I'm supportive of it. Co-sponsorship is important on two levels. One is it shows the committee that you have a big number, a significant number of, if you get a good number of co-sponsors, then you have a significant number of supporters of this bill. So if you report out favorably, a lot of your colleagues will be happy and they will vote it out. You won't look bad. The other is holding legislators accountable, whether it's coming election cycle or as moving forward, like, hey, this is something you supported, thank you. This is something you haven't supported, I want to hold you accountable. This is something I care about, why didn't you support it? So it's a public way of, it's not just in their heads, it's actually a way to say, yes, I'm formally committed to this priority. So things we're asking folks right now is talk to your legislator with two asks, and it's the same ask. One is co-sponsor these bills, and after your co-sponsor, reach out to the committee and say you wanted to report us favorably. But just because they co-sponsor doesn't mean the committee actually gets that communicated to them. Like, they have to actively put it in. The second ask is writing letters of support to the committee itself. So a lot of your power is to your own legislators. Committee members, even if they don't represent your town, they make a decision on behalf of the whole state based on the issues. So you can write a letter of support. It's like, my name is this is the bill I support. I want you to report it out favorably, and these are the reasons why. And the third or final, sorry, one more ask before the final ask is expungement, because that one hasn't had a hearing. It's one of the later ones. If anyone's interested in participating in a hearing on expungement, let me know, because we're generally putting together panels about why this is an important thing. And then finally, the last request is, especially around raise the age, is actually a much more complicated legislation. The comparison and analysis of that bill, it's much more nuanced and deepened. But we think folks who care a lot about mass incarceration don't see how this raise the age is really preventing future generations of all of the things that the folks who are advocating on the adult criminal justice system want to prevent. So one of our asks is, if you know of groups that are interested in a teach-in about this campaign to learn more about raise the age, that's something that our organization is actually actively looking forward to do. So I'll stop here, and I want to thank you for giving me this platform.
Thank you, Sana. It's always so great to work with you on all of these issues. And another action step that folks can take, Sana and I have been talking about creating another space for folks who are interested in writing letters of support for the bills that Sana just talked about, or any of the bills that we're talking about, but may feel like they need a little bit more guidance or a little bit more assistance in figuring out how to do that. We're interested in creating another space to talk about the ins and outs of writing one of these letters. And I am going to ask, we have a Google form. So if folks are interested, please fill out this Google form to let us know that you might want to participate in such a session. And then we'll get back to you with some more details about when and how we will actually do that. And I look forward to working with you on that, Sana. So thank you very much. And now I'm going to turn it over, because this is our opportunity to actually take some action right now. I'm going to turn it over to Emily Poppy, our communications and policy specialist, who's going to tell us a little bit more about one of the bills that was heard today at the hearing that occurred just a few hours ago. Emily?
Thanks, Ruth. So as we heard Maddie talk about earlier, the bill that we call the Crime Gun Data Analysis Bill was heard this morning, and Maddie did an excellent job testifying. And so we have some action steps that you can take. So this bill requires that the state takes action to analyze data that is collected when a gun is recovered in connection with a crime. The state has been recovering this data since 2014, and it's kind of just been sitting there. And so if we are able to get this analysis done, then we can examine how effective our laws are, where any gaps might be, and how we can make these laws better to prevent more gun violence. So I'm going to share this tool that our partners at Stop Handgun Violence created that is really simple. You just plug in your information, it finds your legislator for you, and it will send a letter, send an email directly to them, urging them to support this bill. If you don't get to it right now, that is totally fine. We'll send this out along with the other form that was mentioned in our email tomorrow, but it should take you no more than a minute and a half.
Amazing. Thank you, Emily. So excited to have this tool available to us, and want to thank Zoe and Sonia at Stop Handgun Violence for assisting us with this. It's an opportunity for folks to make their voices heard right now, make sure we are moving the crime gun data analysis bill forward. And so please do take that link and share it with other folks that you know if you think that they would be interested in supporting this effort as well. I am understanding that the Google form might be giving folks a few problems. If you are not able to use the Google form and you would like to participate in a session around learning to do letters of support, please just leave your information in the chat and we can take it that way if you're having problems with the Google form. Now, I'm always really careful to not keep folks too long, so I promise that we will get our meeting done by 8:15, but we did have a few more updates that we wanted to provide to you around things that the coalition has been up to over the past several months. And I am sure that everyone has been hearing a lot about the American Rescue Plan Act and what that means for the state of Massachusetts. So I wanted to share with you a bit about the work that we have been doing on this. The coalition started working with some of our national partners, as well as member orgs, members of our leadership team who formed a working group since I want to say May of this year, and thinking about what an ask might look like of the state of Massachusetts around an allocation of ARPA funds for violence prevention initiatives. And this group came together and really started working first on some core values, wanting to really focus on community-based and community-led initiatives in communities that experienced high rates of COVID-19, of gun violence, of systemic inequities, to make sure that grassroots activists who are doing work in community would be able to get funded to scale up their programs, to reach more individuals and reach more families, because we know that in order to move the needle on gun violence, we need to invest in communities and community-based solutions. And we saw the ARPA funding as being a real opportunity to actually make that happen. And over the past several months, this group has come together to hone the ask, to do some advocacy work. You have seen action alerts from us around both the bills through the House and the Senate, amendments that were filed in order to allocate this funding and be clear about its use. And right now, everything is in the conference committee, and we may in fact get some news tomorrow around where things stand with this funding. It's been a really exciting time for the coalition to be working in community with so many different organizations. The letter that we sent to State House leaders was signed by over 40 different organizations who came together to do this work, and that was also really exciting for us. It's been a great opportunity for us at the coalition to do something that was really going to support the work and the foundation of our member organizations. This funding, should the state allocate it, it's not something that's going to benefit the coalition itself, but it will benefit so many of our member orgs, as well as organizations that we might not even know about. It is structured to provide a grant program that organizations can apply to. It would live in the Executive Office of Health and Human Services, and it would be an opportunity for these community-based and community-led programs to get support for capacity building, for capital expenses, for staff training, for creating a strong foundation to allow them to do the things in community that they know will not just prevent violence, but promote peace. So we hope to have some updates for you around where that funding stands in the very near future. It's been a really amazing process for us to go through. I'm happy to talk about it more with folks who have some more questions about what this has looked like, but stay tuned for more updates about that. Now to end, because it's getting late, I would love to turn it over to our community organizer, Angelica Fonts, just to do a final piece and to round us out for the evening. Angelica.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. It's great to be here with you all this evening. We'd like to really just allow the opportunity for anyone who would like to drop in the chat any final questions that they may have regarding tonight's program. As well, for folks who are interested in staying in touch with the coalition and the work that we're doing and being updated, we also invite everyone to sign up for our newsletter, which I'll be dropping in the chat currently. to receive updates and general information regarding the work of the coalition. Aside from that, if we do not see any questions, I can close this out. And I do hope that everyone has a wonderful evening.
Thanks so much, everyone. We'll stay on for a few minutes in case folks did have questions. But really appreciate all of you being with us this evening and taking time out of your schedule to be in coalition and community with all of us. And thanks to everyone who spoke today. It was really great to be in learning with all of you. And I hope everyone has a great evening.